This is Power 102 Digital Monday. On a Monday, Hard Talk is hosted by Karen Nunez Tesheira. She has a very special guest in the form of Mr. Fazir Khan. Before we get into it, let me remind you that you can call us at 222-8255, 222-8255, 866-525-1099. That's our toll-free number, 866-525-1099. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, so you can send in your comments. Good afternoon, Karen. Welcome.
Good afternoon, David McIntyre from Hard Talk. And of course, yes, we do have a guest and a very special guest. It's already, I'm not seeing him, but we do have his name up and Mr. So I assume that he's here with us in the studio. Fazir Khan, who is the president of the Joint Consultative Council for the Construction Industry. So before I get into the topic, which I guess the fact we have him as our guest is a good indicator as to the topic that we will be looking at today, because we try as best as we can on the show on Hard Talk to keep popular, to keep relevant to the issues, but not just look at them from a very superficial point of view, but do a deep dive and give a broader understanding. So hopefully at the end of the day, that we, the listeners, and ourselves, myself definitely included, and David tells me that also, that we all benefit from the discussion on the show. So let me just very briefly introduce Mr. Fazir Khan and let him give us an idea about the work of the JCC, and also perhaps you would like to say what was the launching pad. I could just perhaps start with what it was, but let him get into it in more detail because it definitely impacts on the Public Procurement and Public Disposal Act of 2015 and all the amendments that had been made to the Act and final proclamation in 2023. So let me just start by saying who Fazil Khan is. He is there we've got, well, I don't have Fazil Khan, but I have something that I expect he's saying represents him. He is currently the current president of the Joint Consultative Council of the Construction Industry. He is the managing director of Alpha Engineering and Design 2012 Limited. And without going in, there's so much I can say about him. 30 years experience in civil engineering and has several certificates, many of them dealing with project management from various institutes, including Henley and far away as Holland. And it seems, with my limited knowledge of these areas, that he seems to have focused on all things water and flooding and things that affect our perennial problem with flooding. But we're not here today to talk about flooding. We're here to use his knowledge and his advocacy as the president of the Joint Consultative Council. So the topic, and I'm going to hand you over to Mr. Khan and let him tell you a little bit more about what the joint, because I went and looked it up and I was very impressed. I'll let him tell you about it. And then we will go on to see what was really the impetus for today's discussion. Very happy to have him on. Today, the topic is really going to be, as I said, we are going to be looking at the construction industry in particular, and a question mark really, because we won't put a statement as a statement, a question mark as the impact of the procurement legislation. We just shorten it to procurement legislation because it's not only procurement, but it's also disposal, which I know Mr. Khan can fill us in with. So I'm going to hand you over to Mr. Fazir Khan, who can tell you a little bit more about the JCC. I'm very impressed, actually, the objectives of JCC and what it has done. So, Mr. Khan, welcome to the show. You're there with us? Seeing something that I know is not Mr. Khan. He's live on.
Yes, he's live. I'm here in some.
Hello.
Mr. Khan, are you there with us?
Yeah, I am. I apologize for that. My camera is facing back, and I.
Okay, we lost him there for a little while. It's you can probably
So what is he's trying to get back onto the program? That's what's going on. You know me. David. If there was a competition about technical knowledge of all things computer, I'd probably be at the bottom of the list,
right.
right? But we do have these issues coming up every now and again, and we're back. You're back with us.
Yes.
So what does that
I
represent?
apologize for that's the backup. That's the back of my desk.
Okay, you're a man of mystery, then, Mr. Khan. Anyhow, without further ado, before we launch into the topic and what was the real impetus for today's discussion, I'm very, very pleased, and I'm not saying that lightly. I'm very, very pleased that you are joining us because I don't think I could get a better person. There we are. I don't think we're seeing you now. We could not get a
Okay,
better person.
I think you have me a bit there.
Yes, we have you, but we have right now looking at us. Good. And I'm glad to know I'm not the only one that has these problems because I can assure you, you're not on the show all the time, but I have my share of problems. But what I was
Because
very to have you on the show, and I could not think of someone more appropriate to discuss today's topic. So I'll hand it over to you to tell the listening public a little bit about what the JCC does, particularly in relation to what is the construction industry of which you are president, and tell us what are your aims, objectives, what you all have done, and what you have advocated for, particularly given the
problem that it's
Procurement
breaking
Act.
up. Are you hearing me, Mr. Sheriff?
Call me Karen. I'm hearing you, but we do have problems with breaking. But you go ahead, and I think David, who is our program director, is going to try and help us along the way so that we will have less of that. But you go ahead and let David try to sort that out because I certainly not the person to do that. Yes, so you can go ahead and let us know a little bit about the GCC and what you do and what your major objectives have been, especially in relation to procurement. Having a lot of problems.
Okay. Good afternoon again to you and your audience. The GCC is the Joint Consultative Council for the construction industry. We have a pretty long history. It was founded. Organization was founded by Mr. Emil Elias and Mr. Winston Riley, and they have lobbied in throughout its history for all things to do with the construction industry, relevant to policies, etc.
And your role as president.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you. We're hearing you fine because I did go on your website and it was a very excellent website and it gives them a lot of details, especially where it comes to what you do in order to achieve, obviously, a certain standard within the construction industry. Because what would have driven the founders of the JCC to find it, to start it in the first place, and what have you therefore made your greatest efforts or focus your efforts on in the JCC in regard to what you probably consider deficiencies that existed within the construction industry?
Yes, so the JCC a challenge in the earlier days to deal with the capacity of the industry that would have occupied the founders and the early presidents a lot in their discourse. Now, in the recent times, and I would say recent, but for 15 years now, there has been a lobby that was one of the main drivers was the JCC, in the form of Mr. Winston Riley, to get reformation in Trinidad and Tobago. And basically, we use the all-inclusive word reform because there is procurement legislation, or there was, which in the form of the Central Tenders Board and whatever existed before that. However, that legislation was not capturing of the necessities and requirements of a modern society, as which we aim to be, and therefore we pushed for complete reformation by the introduction of the new Public Procurement and Property Disposal Act, which was passed by the previous government before they demitted office in 2015, and then it took us until 2024 to actually 2023, I should say, sorry, to actually see the legislation being operationalized and going through all the different processes in the upper and lower house, public comments, and the like. And even since then, there were some amendments, and we now have a working procurement legislation.
Do you think one of the things? Go ahead. You go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, one of the things I saw in your very excellent website, really, it is a good website. I mean, I learned a lot. Could you, in terms of the kinds of the modernization in the construction industry, because I have some little knowledge, not because I got it when I took government, but very indirectly, I can assure you, when they had that commission of inquiry into the construction industry. And then when I had a short stint in private practice and became exposed to the FIDIC type of contract. But what I really was, what if you could explain to people, because I know it's become a very commonplace that the types of construction contracts are design, build, operate, design, build, lease, design, build. Could you explain what those types of construction contracts mean and what is the benefit to the, we're looking at public funds. When we're talking about the Procurement Act, we are only talking about public monies and public assets. We're not talking about private assets. Although there was some amendment which we can look at later on, but essentially what we're talking about, disposal and the procurement of public assets. So could you then explain to the public the different,
yes,
when we talk about modernizing the construction industry, the different categories of construction contracts they have, and what are the benefits for the contractor as well as the person who is contracting with you, which is the government.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So what? Yeah. One of the key facets of the legislation was that it actually defined what was public money. So that has become it's made very clear, because I was informed that there were entities that were actually saying after the act was operationalized that they do not fall under the act. But so the asset test is really the definition of public money,
Which is,
as you can realize, is any direct expenditure of monies by any entity that is public funds or can be deemed as public funds. So
what would be an example?
Well, yeah. So to step back just a bit, the Procurement Act is to do with all government procurement. All the construction is just a part of what the government does to procure the services of private contractors to do public projects. So everything else falls under the Act except for the services that are exempted. So, for example, the, 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 the health organizations would have to procure drugs, and that falls under the Act. And any other government agency that is procuring goods and services falls under the Act, whether it's minor stuff for an office, or major equipment, or for maintenance contracts, or for capital type contracts like a bridge or box trains. So you would see even the local government agencies are all now advertising their tenders in order to comply with the requirements of the Public Procurement Act. And this, for people who observe these ads, would see that there has been an uptick in the ads, because it's now all it needs to be public, so it's published, and it includes the exemptions were clear. In fact, some of the exemptions were brought by the sitting government to add exemptions, and I think legal fees is one of them. I can't remember all offhand, but it's still, even with the exemptions, the amount of money that this country spends annually as and part of the budget is significant, and hopefully we all stand to benefit in the medium term for a greater competition, lower prices, essentially value for money, and full transparency regarding the expenditure of public funds. And the Act deals with this in many different ways. So one first part is like how you put out a tender and the different types of tenders. Now the question you're asking is a very technical question in terms of construction contracts. And
I always wondered what is the benefit, because I know a lot of our contracts, and I'm only answered. I've never got an explanation, nor did I ever seek an explanation. I know that there is a benefit, and a lot of countries in the Caribbean do use that form of contract: design, build, lease, design, build, operate, and so that I get the impression that the contractor takes on the financial burden, so to speak, of the contract and the government. But you explain it, and
so
the benefit of that.
Okay, so as far as construction type contracts are concerned, there was a time when every entity had their own form of contract. So if you were dealing with NIPDEC, they had their own conditions of contract. If you were dealing with NIDCO, they may have their own conditions of contract. The Ministry of Works were also using a different conditions of contracts. However, the contracts that are invariably used now by all of these procuring entities that do in construction is the International Federation of Consulting Engineers contract, which translates to the name FIDIC, as we call it in the industry, and FIDIC because it's French, so it's Fédération Internationale, right, instead of International Federation. And these contracts, basically, we have a design done by what we call the employer, and then it's put out for tender, and then it's bid by contractors, and the successful contractor gets to do the job. In that basic type of tender, the employer needs to hire consultants or architects to complete the designs, and then they go through and they do the drawings, they build the quantities, they put out a tender document, and people tender, then that's it. Now, when we move to another, now in that contract, what the general understanding is, and it's an international contract, so it's very much used all over the world, like a go-to contract, and the risk is shared pretty evenly between the employer and the contractor, and
The government and the contractor, because we deal with public funds.
Government. Oh well, yeah, we say employer because it could be,
Yes,
but
I
in
say
this
the
case,
government.
government and the contractor.
Yeah.
Now, construction is always, especially big construction, is always about risk and how we
Yeah.
mitigate risk. So the other form of contract that is after this one would be like the design build contract, where you simply put out a request for tender based on a terms of reference and performance measures, etc., and some concept designs, and ask people to tender for both the design and build. So it means that if there are organizations that do not have design engineers on board, they have to go and partner with a design consulting engineer, have quantity surveyors, have surveyors, and then have all the construction capabilities within the organization. It's been used fairly frequently in the last couple of years, especially on jobs that were being done by the likes of UDCOT, etc. And in theory, the more of the risk is transferred to the contracting entity away from the government, because one of the downsides of a design bid build as the first one, which you call FIDIC Red Book, is that the contractors can have a lot of claims, etc., because probably there were issues with the design or something like that. When you put the contractor together with the designer at the initial stage, then you do not have that kind of risk anymore, where they just have to find a way to get things done based on the price that they would have given. One can still have variations, and as we have seen in many of our larger contracts, even if it's design build, for a host of different reasons, especially to do with if things change at a very fundamental level in terms of what the concepts were, and but I would always like to say to people, when I get this opportunity to talk to a larger group of people, the risks that contractors price in a design build is the price for risk. So you will find that the contracts are a certain percentage always higher than a design bid build. All other things being equal, I must say, all other things being equal, right? So even though we maybe put in more, sorry,
you sound like a lawyer now.
Well, engineers and project managers that have to deal with these contracts. We tend to practice a lot of within the contract itself, so we have to speak like that, I guess. But the professional quantity surveyors also do a lot of that kind of work, and they train too. But good practicing civil engineers and other project managers would be very au courant with the contract document. Now, when you go to design, build and operate, what you're doing there is putting even more onus on the contracting entity to deliver the goods almost in a turnkey project. And you mentioned finance. So when you go to finance, remember now nothing comes free. So the financing comes with a price. All the other risk comes with a price, because no contractor is going to remain in business if they don't price these things properly in order to get it done. And at the end of the day,
they're taking a great risk. It seems to me a lot of risk is taken on by the contractor, so he has to protect himself. from what you're seeing. And I did have some experience with city contracts myself, not on behalf of the representing the government as a lawyer in my lawyer days, not as a minister days. And so I have some understanding of it. And your explanation really does help, because I don't want to go too much off the point. What you already have said and given an explanation, which I don't think I really appreciated before, is that, I always looked at design, build, operate, design, build, lease as though, yes, it gave the government a grace period because it meant that the risk was being taken on more or less by the contractor, and the payments were going to be paid over an extended period of time, which allowed the government to have, not having to find all this money to be able to finance the building, say, of a hospital or whatever it is. So I think your explanation as to why you would have the designer on with the design build part, because he may have the building experience, but he may not have the design experience. So they do have to work together. But I just want to just do two more little points on JCC and go to why we asked you to be here this afternoon, and what was the launching pad, or what I call it, trigger. Trigger is not such a nice word for today's discussion. I was impressed, and you could explain it to me better. I see that you all have, I don't know, you have succeeded. I don't know if you have, it's updated. But one of the things I see that the JCC is committed to is establishing a code of practices for the national small buildings. I thought that was really, when we spoke about a small, medium enterprise and those persons who cannot bid for the big, huge contracts, I was wondering whether that had anything to do with it. I don't know, and I'm asking. And I also noticed that you wanted to set up a code also for the plumbing code and to standardize that. And those are two things that, if I could ask you to do that. And the final one, so it's the National Small Building Code. So I assume that you were looking after the interests of what we'll call the small man for the smaller contracts, the plumbing code. And finally, the third thing I wanted to ask you before we step into today's discussion in more detail is, I noticed you were looking for, and I don't know if it has happened, the implementation of legislation for registering and licensing of contractors. I could take it in whichever order you wish: plumbing, small business code, and the licensing and registration of contractors. You could tell us a little bit more about that, because those are all very, it's good for the country. It's doing what you're saying, adding value for the country, and definitely improving standards for the persons operating in the industry in Trinidad and Tobago. It really does. And I suppose we're able to take those same skill sets and translate it into other Caribbean countries, because I know that the civil business, my brother was once a civil engineer and left it because it was feast or famine in those days. I'm sure you remember those days when the economy was in a terrible state. And so unfortunately, he had to abandon. He was a civil engineer, but changed professions because things got so hard. So seeing you taking these kinds of initiatives is really encouraging to me. So if you could address those three things.
Right. Okay, I need to just explain. The JCC is an umbrella body.
Right.
And we represent the planners, the architects, the Trinidad and Tobago Planning Society, the architects, and the Trinidad and Tobago Institute of Architects, the contractors in the Trinidad and Tobago Contractors Association, and the engineers in the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, so as an umbrella body, we tend to coalesce and give some more weight to pressing issues that are brought up by our members, who are those 4 people, 4 sets of organizations in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, so the initiative for some of these endeavors most likely would have been taken by one of these entities, like for instance the plumbing code. I know that was being revamped, and APET was involved, as well as the Contractors Association. And the small building code, that one is a little bit closer to myself. I was actually a past president of the Association of Professional Engineers, and before me and after me, there were several changes that were being made to the small building code, and I do not think it has been institutionalized as yet.
What's the objective there, though?
The objective is more technical
Okay.
than creating a space for smaller contractors as an enterprise. Technical meaning that the smaller contractors would be building homes, etc., for private people that may not be
Up to
cannot
code.
pass us engineering standards. So
Right.
essentially, it was like defining the standards and code of practice that they could follow in order to build homes that are more resilient. So to put that in perspective, if we doing if anyone is doing a 5-story building tomorrow, whether it's a mall or a private building, well, not private building for commercial use, you have to
Right.
get approval, and
Yes.
that approval comes with the due diligence of checking your designs. So
Right.
when you make the application to the Ministry of Works Structural Division, they would give you all your requirements up front. So you have to design in accordance with those codes and stipulations, and then you produce your designs, and they have to check it and go through a process to get it approved. However, a large sector of building that goes on in this country is done by family type contracting businesses who would have learned to build over the years, and they would be building houses and other structures that would, if we get a hurricane um, like Beryl, I would think more than 50% of our roofs will blow off. And I could tell you that coming. I was in Grenada in Carriacou for one day out of the couple days I stayed there week before last.
Yes.
And it was absolutely eye-opening to see the devastation that that occurred, even with houses that were fairly new, and how they lost their roofs. So, and these are simple details that need to be that can be adhered to. And the Association of Professional Engineers tries to take the forefront in bringing that sort of information to the public, in doing seminars, etc., or trainings, training the smaller contractors and that sort of thing.
Can I just say something on that? Because it's more, and when I say more personal, it's not really personal per se to me, but it is along the lines of what you are saying. I am talking, well, I was talking specifically with the plumbing. And I did have a gentleman who did do work for me in my home, plumbing work, who was quite competent. Yes, I thought he was quite competent. And I kept saying to him, why don't you get your certification? Why don't you get your certification? I said, if you don't have a certification, you will always have to work under someone. You will never be able to work on your own. But he has passed away, unfortunately. A young man, fairly young. And, you know, and I always wondered, is it that they make it, is it the cost? Is it the difficulty? You know, sometimes I wonder, and I truly am asking this because I was always behind him to get certified, you know? And I am really asking if sometimes we put systems in place and bureaucracies and red tape in place and requirements in place, like, well, it might seem unrelated, but it's the same type of point with the fishermen, with the oil spill, with what they require to submit. Sometimes you wonder if what they want you to provide or to do is out of the means of many of these persons who take the risk, of course, and we, the homeowners, take the risk of letting them do work for us because they have a lot of experience. The negative of it is, before I end, was this. Which I've had experience, but I won't say what it was about. But the thing about it is, when you give the risk, unfortunately, to people who are not certified and therefore don't have an established business, when something goes wrong, they're not in any position to rectify financially because, they say in Trinidad, they don't even have a parrot on a stick. So sometimes you would like to help out people like in those sorts of situations, but you are forced from experience, certainly from our experience that we had, not to be able to give them give them an opportunity, because when things go wrong, because they do not have the requisite knowledge, which we don't have, and something goes wrong, they disappear. And even if you find them, they're not able to rectify because they simply don't have the insurance ability. So is there something that, besides giving them a code, is there something about the requirements of becoming a certified plumber or certified whatever, that makes it, that could be made more, it could be made easier or could be made less difficult? Or is it just what stops people from,
Yeah.
not having?
Okay, Mr. Tesheira. So this is actually much more formal than
Mm,
than what you seem to know.
right.
But it's administered by WASA, right?
Okay.
So WASA, if you go on WASA's website, you will see that anyone can apply for to be a licensed plumber,
Right.
and there are forms, and they stipulate the sort of experience you must have in terms of, say, a YTEP diploma or something from that, whatever the Ministry of Education would do, or UWE diploma. You have extramural classes, you have craftsman assistant. So they have very different ways that the
Of
plumbers
course.
can get first of all certified before they apply for their license in order to get the license approved. Now the cost on this, as far as I know, is about $500 if if it is approved, and then
Right.
they would be a licensed plumber. So
I'm glad
that,
you told
if
me
that
that.
information is not out there, I think most plumbers know it is. What a lot of people, we still have that. We learn a lot of trade. Still learn a lot of trade by like informal apprenticeship. So
Yes.
a plumber, a licensed plumber, may take on 5 guys, and they will train, and then they get to know the work, and then they may or may not pursue a license themselves. I think
Or they might
I think
decide to
along,
go off on their own, and you are taking a risk to let them do work for you, because when things go wrong, they can't compensate you for the loss. And that's the fact. I mean, I've had the experience.
yeah.
So
So there is that. There I do think, though, that with the advent of training online and stuff, that any young people who have a liking to plumbing and could learn all of it, then get certified and have a business. I think there's a lot of scope for it.
thank you very much for saying that, because do you know, I would love you to, if you could mention some of them, because I had done a show the other day, and I uh, I had done a show the other day. The topic, it was not the topic, but it ended up being the topic about education. And the person was very, I mean, very, very what is the word I want to use? They a very strong view, very, very, very strong view that there were not sufficient opportunities in Trinidad for persons who did not want to pursue becoming doctors and lawyers or accountants, that we did not have enough trade opportunities and trading opportunities to become tradesmen in different areas. Only thing I could have remembered at the time was MIC, but I mean, I was caught off guard. But from what you're saying, there are avenues by which people can get training in various areas which are not the academic areas, but are areas in which they can enhance their skill sets and become certified in the, well, we're talking about the construction industry, because there are places and institutions that provide those opportunities. Is that what I understand you to be saying?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, MIC, I think you probably should have Professor Clement Imbe
Yeah.
on because I mean, education is his thing, but do believe he's still chairman of MIC.
But
And
they don't have MITEP and all those. What else? There CoStat, others. I mean, I could only think of MIC. They caught me off guard. So all that came out of
well,
my mouth was MIC.
yeah, well, I am not Professor Clement Imbe, so I can't call them all out for you either. But
Right.
we certainly have a lot of technical training that is available in Trinidad, and we are actually one of the most technically capable countries in this part of the world, which is why we export our services to other islands and even in the oil industry. Well, I think you would be aware how much our human
Very
capacity is utilized all over the world because of our history. And before that, my understanding is that when the British came in the early days of oil, and they brought with them their very well known apprenticeship system, and
yes.
and they would have like the older versions of BP and whatever they were.
Yes. Yes.
They
Yes.
would have taken on all of these apprentices and they would have been very properly trained, and
Yeah.
that has passed down over the years. So even in terms of say our boating yard capabilities to fix and repair boats, it all
Yeah.
came out from having a heavy industrialized pursuit
Yeah.
in from
Yes.
oil and then into Point Lisas, etc. So we
Yes.
when I am lucky that I work all up the islands, from as high up as Tortola all the way down to Grenada, and
Yes.
in providing engineering, providing civil engineering, but I always see our countrymen filling the breach in
Yes.
many areas. And you would know that lawyers do a lot of work up the islands. But we have engineers, technicians, QA/QC people, health and safety people, because we always are just a little bit ahead of the game,
To have
because of
someone on the I'm going to have someone on the show. Good afternoon, Mr. Bisnar. We have one person who is a loyal follower, and I could not acknowledge his presence. But please, people, feel free to call him. We have somebody at Fazir Khan who is a wealth of knowledge and encyclopedia, and I want to take advantage of that. But what I'm going to do, because I didn't accept what was being said, but I just couldn't at the time, and I was unprepared for the discourse to take that direction, and I did not. And I felt it was a bit unfair because even and I'm certainly not part of the government. I mean, I am a deputy political leader of Hope, so I could definitely not here advocate for the government. But I am not going to be unfair, and I'm not going to say things that I don't feel that are not right. I'm not there to just to be critical for being critical sake. And I was pretty certain that there are opportunities. And the apprenticeship thing, they brought that up, by the way, and I'll leave it after that. They brought up the apprenticeship thing in the oil companies. My father worked in Shell at a fairly senior level, and we saw the apprenticeship system work. And what they were saying with the closure of the refinery and all of that, a lot of those opportunities were lost, and they were bemoaning the fact that so many people had the opportunity to have those apprenticeship experiences, and with the closure of the refinery, it has been lost. But that's a whole different conversation, and perhaps I can perhaps not the Mr. Mbe, not that one, not at all, and the Dr. Mbe,
Clement.
not the
Yeah,
Mr. Not the
Professor
Mr.
Clement Imbe.
And yes, I know who it is. I'll ask the doctor. But let me, for reasons best known, anyway. But I want to come to the topic at hand, and that is, and you've given a really good background. I'm glad that people understand the work of GCC. I see you talk about trying to get people to register as licensed contractors, and so on. But before I I do that, I wanted there are two things, and I'm going to turn it over again back to you. Is I think the launching pad or the trigger for today's discussion came out as a result of an articles that were in the daily newspapers, one in on August 6, 2024, and it was the award, but the intended award, because I know there's a standstill period, but the intended award of a contract of nearly $500 million to a Chinese firm to build and construct houses in Santa Rosa. And what was, I mean, you're one of your founders, because there's no secret, he came out and said Emilio Elias was one of the persons who said that he was undisappointed with the fact that the contract had been awarded to them, since they happen to be, I think, they're about the highest bidder. And I got a list, I sat down and the 11 companies, because it was disclosed. And yes, I mean, I will have to say that if the 459, I think it's 475 million, yes. If there were about 3 or 4 other out of the 11 companies, or 4 or 11 companies who were in that vicinity, I would say, well, that probably is the price for constructing these houses. Maybe, it's a good point. But then when I looked, I did not put down the names of the companies, except Ennis, because he disclosed it. Most of them were 159 million, 287 million, 337, 344, 259 was his, and one that was way below the rest, 195. But so the disparity in the tender for the job of 11 companies, with the one apparently with the highest bid for the job, was a reason for pause. And I do think with the procurement legislation, which we could talk a little bit, and I'll let you speak about a little bit about, but I was, Ministry of Finance is the initiator of the procurement policy in 2005. They presented a white paper. They went through the history of the Central Tennis Board, how it operated, the changes that were made over time, and deficiencies, and the model that they advocated for, what is called the principal model. And so I'd have to say that it was in 2005, although the law was passed in 2015 and was not proclaimed, made implemented until about all of it, until 8 years later. But I do think that what he seemed to be indicating, he said he and another, they had a standstill period starting July the 31st of 10 days, according to the specs of the contract. And the agency, who was the client, did say that they complied with what the procurement legislation required them to do in terms of submitting a bid. But if I was to understand what Mr. Elias was hinting at, he was more than hinting at it, he kept on talking about the request for proposal. And he indicated, and this is where I'm asking you now, the passage of the procurement legislation, if it has made a difference and can make a difference from the days where NIPDEC was allowed to do its own thing. Since 1993, NIPDEC was allowed to do its own thing. And a number of other state enterprises were allowed to do their own thing in terms of preparing procurement documents, etc. But he seemed to be indicating that the RFP, well, you must know, because I would like you to tell us what a tender bid should look like, what the document should include. But he seemed to be indicating that the ratio was 60-40, and I think 60 was single houses and the rest were townhouses, or the other way around. But he seemed to be indicating that, in fact, were they going to be that, or was it going to end up to be multi-story buildings, 5 to 6 stories high? He seemed to be indicating that the request for proposal and what was the intended, during the standstill period, intended awardee of the contract had not complied with the request for proposal. Now, he had 10 days, and the other person, I don't know if that had to be made public, or if he did not pursue it, was persuaded not to pursue it, because we know that it is no secret that he and the Prime Minister are friends. And I can say that openly because in the Commission of Inquiry into the construction industry, it is on record for anyone who wishes to read it that Dr. Rowley admitted that he and Emil Elias of NH were close personal friends and that he assisted him financially in his bid to become the leader of the opposition. So I am not saying, Karen Tesheira is not saying that is the Commission of Inquiry based on the evidence that Dr. Rowley would have led at the time. So there's no question that there is a close relationship between them. And therefore, to hear Emil Elias, of all people, and the founder of the JCC coming out like that, it gave us pause. So what is an RFP supposed to contain? Because what he's indicating and what the legislation, because I went and looked up all the legislation and looked at the provisions that I should take a special attention to, Section 6 in particular, which says that if any of the procurement requirements set out in the Act are not complied with, there are any irregularities, and they are proven to be so, that contract will be deemed to be null and void. So I want to know from you what an RFP would consist of. And, you know, I guess you can't answer for Mr. Elias, but I mean, I have some strong statement to make.
Okay, so yes, I have to laugh, right? Just a bit, because it's a serious thing. It's a very, very serious thing. So first of all, I'd want to say that the legislation as it stands now, even though some would claim that it was diluted and may use other adjectives, the current legislation as it stands gives us a really good chance as a country to gain more efficiency in procurement and to save a lot of money after some time when we sort out all the bugs, because it essentially takes the politician, who may be the minister and otherwise, out of the equation. And essentially, you have procurement officers being faced with conducting themselves properly around public money, with the penalty of being prosecuted should they choose not to do so. So this is very serious in that the laws come with all the $500,000 fees and all of that for penalty for being found guilty of malfeasance in very spelled out way. And for instance, it is the first time in any law in Trinidad that collusion is against the law. And you may be aware that they have several cases that may already be debated many years, going on for years now, where there seems to be some sort of collusive effort between parties.
Are you talking about 25 years ago or thereabouts, the one with the airport?
No. I'm talking about
the airport, because you couldn't be talking about the airport.
No.
You could not be talking about the airport.
Yeah. So now collusion comes with a very high price if it is discovered, and you could be prosecuted. And we have an independent body in the form of the OPR, who under the law does not take guidance or instructions from anyone, but simply has to lay their report in Parliament and to the Minister of Finance. But there was a time when the way that was written, it was, you had to go through the Minister of Finance. So there could have been a vetting process. Now it is not like that in law. The report was delivered to the clerk on the Parliament or somebody like that. It's named in the Act, and a copy is also delivered to the minister. So it's certainly not business as usual, because there is oversight and independent oversight. And if there are problems that any party sees it fit to bring to the OPR, there is a method and prescribed in law that's very simple to do. Now, I sat here on my computer on this weekend, and I lodged a complaint about an entity, a public procuring entity that did not have contracts published on their website. When you go on their website, what you see is a blank form without any contracts published. Now, under the relevant part of the Act, within X weeks of making a contract formal, they have to publish it on their website or some other equal media.
Yes.
Now, it didn't take me more than 15 minutes to utilize the complaint form on the OPR website, lodge that simple complaint, which has nothing to do with a tender, but what it has to do with is the procuring entity is not following the law. The law says
it does have something to do with the tender, because it's part and parcel of the whole tender process.
Well, yes, but it doesn't have to do with a particular tender.
Yes, but it's all part of bringing
Correct.
transparency, accountability. So you cannot say that is not part of it, because even for myself, sometimes I go up on the website and I say, you know what? I want to know who got this contract. I want to know how much they got this contract for.
Exactly.
It was supposed to finish, when it didn't finish, and what was the overrun on the contract. I want to be able to go up at any time and be able to see that. And the reason for that is because your preamble to the legislation and Section 5 of the object says one of the objectives of this procurement legislation is accountability and transparency, integrity, and value for money. And the way you make me have confidence in what you're doing, public confidence, that is what you're trying to do through the Act, is there must be transparency. And if I don't have that information, then it is not and you did the right thing and you got the right response. And I am happy to hear that. But we might have. Can I just say this, which is in no way intended to throw cold water on anything that you've said. And maybe it is because I'm a lawyer, and maybe it is also because I've been in government, that it has made me a bit of a cynic. I would admit it freely, but it is not without good reason. So you say that ostensibly and in theory, the office of the regulator, the regulator is independently appointed. He's appointed by the president, and the president appointed by the what is that organization? The Electoral College, which is really controlled by the government, which is a whole story by itself, which we're not going into. But the fact of the matter was that there was a time Munira Lalchan had been appointed under the former government. And when his term of office came to an end, there was a point when there was no regulator in place, because his period of service had come to an end and they had not put in place a time that there was a regulator. That's something is wrong with that. There are different ways of frustrating. You don't have to frustrate in a very direct way. And I'm not saying that's what they were doing, but that's one. Secondly, he got in a lot of hot water for saying that $5.2 billion is wasted or lost every year because of corruption in the procurement procedure in this country. And that instilled the wrath of the government for this independent holder of an office. Thirdly, you mentioned that he has Section 24, which it took a long, long time to pass, because you made the point about 2015 is when the law was passed. But it's only in 2023 that the whole law was proclaimed. I don't even think the whole law was proclaimed, because there's a Part 6 dealing with disposal of real estate to private persons, and they can't, and it has not been implemented or proclaimed because the regulations have not been implemented. The history of that Procurement Act does not instill confidence. Number one, when the office of the regulator himself had written several times to the Minister of Finance saying that they were ready to have the law. It's already passed, to have it proclaimed. What was stopping them from doing so was the lack of regulations. And I remember what he did say. The Minister of Finance said he's not a post office. That was his answer. That's the kind of response he gave. It took 8 years before the act was fully proclaimed. That is one of the things. Munilal Lalchan, that report you're saying that goes to the Parliament, Section 24. They took quite a while before they proclaimed it. It was not proclaimed right away because it's like the Auditor General. You know, the Auditor General sends her report to the Minister of Finance, to the head of the Senate, President of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House. All three of them get to see it at the same time. So there's no difference with the procurement thing to say that's independent. The Minister of Finance is seeing it at the same time as the Speaker is seeing it, as the Senate is seeing it. At the same time, it's happened with the Auditor General, which apparently he didn't like her report. So I don't know what I'm not sure what you're saying about that level of independence. I'm sorry, I have not seen in action. I have not been convinced that there is that level of independence. Yes, that's the intention. It took 8 years to pass it. And the Section 7, they passed it by a simple majority. To pass that act, you needed a special majority of 3/5. And I think there's something terribly wrong. And I think some lawyers, I don't know if they went further with it, but they went with a simple majority with Section 7, which is one of the most important provisions in the Act because it exempts certain contracts from the oversight of the regulator. And they passed it by a simple majority because they said it was an amendment. And it was a serious amendment. Not the national security part I could understand, but medical services, services, legal services were exempt from the oversight of the regulator. And they passed it by a simple majority. Those are things that must cause you concern. And the fact that it took so long to pass the legislation was because they were not getting the regulations in place. The regulations are still not at least as far as I understand it. They had the 5 of 2016. They did one of the amendments, which is the disposal of real estate and to private persons. And it says in that section that it was passed, I think in 2016, this is 7 years later. I do not think that part has been broken. I'm subject to being corrected because it said it needs the regulations to be enacted. And my understanding from, I think, a very good source is that the regulations were not enacted. So it may sound good in theory, but the practice don't seem to add up. And the reason why I raised, and I will let you interject there, having said what I've said, when I looked at the procurement legislation, and I looked both at the preamble and Section 5, which talks about the objects, it talks about, and I guess that's one of the points Mr. Emile realized, and any contractor in Trinidad should be willing to, especially in an economy that is, there's no question. I don't have to convince you. The macroeconomic indicators are there to read for central bank. I don't have to CSO and them publish it. The foreign exchange, inflation, the fiscal deficit. I don't have to make up those figures. They're all there for you and me to read, right? But what I noticed is it talked about in the object Section 5 again. Repeated the preamble, but what it says is accountability, transparency, integrity, value for money, efficiency, fairness, equity, and this is the important part. And C, and the local industry development, sustainable procurement and sustainable development in public procurement. So it seems to me that when you're weighing a contract, all things being equal, as you said yourself, I would imagine a consideration of that public procurement legislation and the award of any contracts or etc. would be protecting the local industry, and there's a certain part that talks about the socio-economic development of the country. Doesn't that not matter at all, Mr. Khan?
Okay, you said a lot of things there, and I'll have to try to take them one at a time and not forget, right? So maybe I'll
Yeah.
start in the reverse. Um, the of course it matters, and but we can't. If we have a system and we have laws, then we have to let them work, and we all have some sort of interest. We have all have the JCC has a lot of skin in this game. If you may not remember, but the JCC, apart from Mr. Lalchan, the JCPC was in the papers almost every week, making public comment about pressuring the government to pass the legislation in its present form. So we pride ourselves in being an apolitical organization. We are interested. We are in this for the good of the country, the good of the industry, and generally the good of people in society. And if we can help to get laws passed that will gradually take us from where we are to a better place, then we believe that we our efforts are not wasted. I certainly would prefer to live in Trinidad today rather than 10 years ago, when we did not have this legislation, and I could
That is
actually do something about it. But it's not going to happen overnight. Again, the JCC is on record saying that when the legislation is passed, and I'm on a record of saying this in several publications, that it will be at least 5 years before we start to realize the true benefits. Now, the number $5 billion, I have repeated it myself, and Mr. Lalchan is probably one of the first people that said it, but basically it came from a paper that says that corruption is about 10% of your annual budget. Corruption and inefficiencies, right? So that's where 4.5 or 5 billion would have come from annually. So I was always careful to say it's the potential to save, but we must not forget that this issue about efficiency as well. That is part of the mantra of the OPR, in having a system that is almost a one-stop shop system. You will eventually eradicate a lot of duplication. So I am as a consultant, or when I was back in the days as working with contractors, we have to fill out forms every year or every 2 years to pre-qualify to all the agencies that you want to work for. Every 2 years. Now you fill out one form and you only update it, and you sit down at your desk and do that. Now, the point I want to make here, Mr. Tesheira, is that there is a lot of ignorance, even from the people who should know about the law, and that is because if we deliver the public service, we know what we can expect to find inside there in terms of people wanting to see change. Nobody wants to change. Now, that is even true in the private industry, but I want to say, at the risk of being reprimanded for it, is that in the public service, that is even twice as hard. To outfit the procuring agencies with all the capacity, human resource and otherwise, that it requires in order to have this thing working to some degree of comfort, will obviously take some time, and we have to go through some growing pains. And in our interaction with the OPR, because we had some serious issues and we requested to see the current regulator, and she acceded to this, and I and my colleagues went and we sat down and had 2 hours of discussions about many things, including why the report wasn't submitted at the end of last year. We were never happy with that. we were on record as saying that.
You all
And in
spoke
fact,
out on that. And you all spoke out on that.
yes. And when we came out at the end of March or April and said, well, this is not here, and it was, we sort of precipitated the report being published. It is unfortunate. And to your point, I do not think this is not deliberate. That it was submitted when Parliament was closing, and now we don't get to have eyes on it until September. So I'm not an idealist. I certainly understand the reality of the politics we live in and so forth, notwithstanding the fact that we would remain apolitical in our views, and that is pretty easy to do when you're in a position like mine. If you understand why you're doing it, we're doing this for the good of the industry, the good of the population, the good of the country, and whereas we could see sometimes that we are being played, like with respect to the timing of that report. You take it on the chin, and you know that time longer than twine, and I would see the report, and then I would see everything. No, the fact that we did not have the report, it means, and the OPR again, if I have to criticize them for something else, is they would go on and pay for advertisements telling people, if you see something, say something, and all this kind of thing. What am I going to see or say without the data? Hence, I want to see the report published, and then I know what is supposed to be in the report, and I'm going to check out that everything is there, and then I'm actually going to start to look at the details, and we're going to start to look at the numbers and the statistics and whatever else that we would find inside there, and then we would be able to make complaints or comments or suggestions moving forward, because we do not see ourselves as not working in for the same objectives as the OPR. In this particular case, we see ourselves as having almost the exact same objectives, but they are the entity that is now charged in law with the responsibility, and we are a civil society group that is very interested, remains very, very interested. As I say, we have a lot of skin in the game in getting this law passed, and you will remember. I'll say one last thing. You will remember that when Mr. Lalchand's term was up, you may not remember, but the JCC was also on more than one occasion calling for him to have a second term, which is allowed under the act, under the law, and that was not so. But be that as it may, we now have to deal with the new regulator, and she in this case has to.
I'm going to move my computer because it's about to die on me. So if you don't mind, you keep on talking and I'm listening. I'm going to have to
so the OPR is very well outfitted with a cadre of technical people, lawyers, procurement specialists, etc., and they cannot go about by omission, not carrying out their duties. The duties are prescribed in law, and we all, every citizen has the right to complain when our money is not being spent. If we think it's not being spent the way it should be spent, or if the regulator or the oversight body is not doing what it's supposed to do in the black and white that's written in the law. So we need more civil society groups and people to get involved and just understand the basics of the act. And if you don't, go to somebody else who might be interested and who has some information and do it. But the OPR has to act. Look, I sent my complaint on Saturday morning, and I got an acknowledgement at about 10 o'clock today via email, and that it is being dealt
Then
with.
you're coming on the show, what? I'm joking, I'm joking, I'm joking, I'm joking, I'm
Sorry,
joking.
I didn't hear what you said.
I was just being silly. I was just being silly.
Yeah.
I appreciate all what you're saying, and you. I want to tell you that I'm really glad that I've had you on the show because you are taking a realist point of view. You have clearly shown that you operate within the realities of any country that is introducing something new that others may not, be, excited about. And you have definitely been a lobbyist group, the one that has stood out in times when I've read the papers. And you are right to say that things take time. But I want to, and so I think you have validated not only your work, but the work of the JCC and the approach that the JCC has taken. And it is, and I'm very glad that I have a Mr. Montano, so I have to recognize him because he's one of our faithful listeners. And but just to say that your explanation, which was very well. It was very balanced, and that's what that's the word I would use. I would say it's a very balanced and very realistic position you took. But I want to say this, and then I'm going to send it right back to you and let you sort of counterpoint. And in fact, it will strengthen your argument because I shouldn't even say argument. What you're putting forward to the public, because you are not living in La La Land and you're not saying that there is nothing wrong with anything and you're not saying that all is well, but what you're saying is that it takes time and it's a great improvement. And you're right, because let me just say quickly the two things. One of them is just briefly why the procurement legislation was so important, although we have sort of mentioned it, but I don't think people understood how how the smallest state the tendering procedure was in Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to then ask you again when I responded a little bit on you saying that we have all these independent institutions and all these independent pieces of legislation and all the things that you said which have value. I'm going to then say part of the reason is a lack of maybe a lack of that cynicism, which is not without reason. But first, I just want to mention that it was in 2005 that white paper was written on the need for a procurement policy. And it was before the Cost Accounting Division and the Ministry of Finance was responsible for it. And what they said, and I will just go straight to the major point, is that it had sole and exclusive authority for inviting and considering and accepting or rejecting offers. But they had no responsibility. They were not equipped to monitor. There are no human resource there were human resource deficiencies because there's no one trained sufficiently in the various entities or within the Chief State Solicitor Department to really monitor these procurement contracts, as well as the fact that the government had slowly but surely become more involved in the procurement process and in the acquisition of properties. But the major deficiencies, which I think the procurement legislation has tried to address, is that the Central Tenders Board, which was the Act of 1961, it was not responsible for the design stage. And I know from my own experience, having dealt with a contract, which I will not reveal, with the contract, but I do know that oftentimes the designs are inadequate and incomplete, and yet they are passed and allowed to pass, and knowing very well that along the way that there are going to be change orders. Some of them may be the client itself. Oftentimes it's already built into the system that there are going to be requests for change orders, and that is very worrying that we did not have in the Central Tenders Board either the competencies, the knowledge to be able to go beyond the tendering of the document. We couldn't monitor. We're not responsible for the design stage. We were not responsible for the at which critical decisions are made. Not equipped to monitor project implementation. Excluded from the many significant procuring agencies. The deck was one, etc., etc. And so there was a lot of reasons why they felt that there was a need for procurement legislation, which we eventually have today. But the last thing I would say, and then turn it over to you, because you've done a very good, in my view, very, no, I wouldn't say persuasive. I think you put things in perspective, and that's important. I think part of the reason why the response, which I don't think I am really alone in that regard, that persons had when they heard of the award of the contract to the Chinese company, and it was much higher apparently than the other 11 bidders, was because it was like deja vu again. But deja vu means exactly that. And that is because you may recall, I know you would recall, that I believe it was in 2018, I think I wrote it down here and I can't even find it now, I'm looking for it.
2019.
Well, no, before that, in 2018, I think the Prime Minister, it was he no longer held the office of, about to being Prime Minister, the office of Public Administration and Communications, but now held the office of the Ministry of Housing and Mitchell was then moved to tourism. And then I'm looking for the actual, I have it written down, I definitely have it written down because I wanted to make sure that I did not, I got it right now. I got it here. So on the 9th of April, 2018, the Prime Minister was appointed the Minister of Housing, including his office of Prime Minister, and the Minister of Housing was moved to the Ministry of Tourism, where he still is today. This is on the 9th of April, 2018. And that same year, in July, the 13th of 2018, that same year, a framework agreement was entered into by ATC, and it was signed by Brent Lyons. And I looked up the meaning of a framework agreement, and that is from the procurement legislation. And it's defined in the Act as an agreement or other arrangement between one or more procuring entities and one or more contractors or suppliers, which establish the terms, particularly in terms of the price, where appropriate, the quantity under which the contract will be entered into. That was done within a matter of months, and the Prime Minister didn't stay very long as Minister of Housing. He stayed there for a few months, and then he moved on to another and gave up that post of Minister of Housing. The final agreement, which was done with great fanfare at the Hyatt Regency on May 17, 2019, and signed by the chairman, Newman George, was the contract with this Chinese company to build over 5,000 houses in South Trinidad. And there was a high headline in the Express Business of August 20, 2019, which said HTC sweetheart deal with Chinese contractors. I didn't make that up. And on the September 5th of 2019, Prime Minister Rowley also said he didn't know anything about the contract. And he canceled the contract. Well, why you don't know why he canceled? Because you all were helpful. You all were helpful. We didn't have a procurement legislation, which you can talk about, which now would deal with a lot of what had to be done in those days. You all went under, as I remember it, the JCC went under the Freedom of Information Act for the government to disclose the contents of that contract that was signed. It was so egregious and so not value for money, so lacking in accountability, so lacking in any interest in the government's, the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the terms which I took from the article, so one of the terms were payments in US dollars. We don't have US dollars to pay them 600 million in US dollars. They also to reimburse all contract VAT payment within 1 month after each interim payment. ATC also agreed to use its own funds to reimburse the Chinese contractors. ATC agreed to reimburse the corporate tax and all the other tax payments within 1 month after submission. No customs duties imposed, no other duties imposed, work permits for 400 Chinese laborers and an extra 200 extra permits. HTC was responsible for making arrangements for the permits and the work permits, and HTC was to supply sufficient security for the contractors and their personal property. It was so egregious. And how we found out it was the JCC under the Freedom of Information Act that we found out that our government and the Prime Minister was the Minister of Housing for a few months when the framework agreement was signed, And then he had to scuttle it and say he didn't know what it had. And by the way, those agreements have penalty clauses, so that if you decide that you're not going forward, they can invoke a penalty clause against you. So if it is, and we're hearing about Chinese getting another housing contract for 475, and you have people from your same JCC complaining, membership of your JCC complaining about it and saying it's much higher than everybody else's own, you cannot blame people and you cannot blame the public for having a certain level of cynicism given this very experience, which I have made up none of it. I have taken all that information from the newspapers. So I want to give you an opportunity, having said so, because I think your heart is in the right
so
place.
yeah,
What is the Procurement Act done that is going to improve what happened in 2019, that the likelihood of a similar situation replaying itself? The act itself, the things that they have, the provisions of the act itself.
Okay. Are you hearing?
Yeah, very well. I'm hearing very well.
Clearly?
Not so well. You're sounding like you're breaking up, but be persevere, because I know that there is a lot in the procurement legislation that addresses those concerns, and I would like to give you the chance, because you all have been a great
Yes.
lobby and you all have been very instrumental, and I'd like you to speak to it, because it will give people a sense that, you know, it's not that you'll just sat back and allowed that, but you're very much behind the passage of this legislation.
Yes, Ms. Tesheira, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. I think I lost you there for a while, but okay. So yes, my name is actually on that request for freedom of information. One of the first things I did in 2019 when I became president, and the HTC did respond, yes, and then when everything became public, the contract was withdrawn. Now the JCC is on record in this current scenario of saying that we live in a different world now, where we have procurement legislation and we have an independent overseer in the OPR. And we have also said that we expect that any aggrieved party, one of the aggrieved parties, will make a charge, and that process starts. So that, if my arithmetic is correct, that date for lodging a challenge would have been last week Friday.
July
What the law says is that the within 3 days of application for review shall make some publish the challenge within 3 days. So I expect challenge was made. I expect to see it be. I did see. So if one was made, I expect to see that. And to deal with the details of the merit of the review process, and I was fortunate to attend a very open on Facebook challenge that went through the full process, whereby it was reviewed. They had the complainant and the and I think it was people from the deck online it was published through Facebook, and the company that made the complaint representative was there as well, and they went through the whole process in terms of the arguments back and forth. It lasted about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and then the OPR went away, and within the prescribed time in the act, they came back and made their decision, and the decision was not for the procuring entity, the government, but it was for the entity that complained, the private entity that complained, who happened to be a consultant. And it 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 was about the scope of work that was tendered versus the scope that the procuring entity, the government entity, wanted to to make the award for, because they only had limited funds. The OPR saw this as a no-no and said, no, squash that process, go and do it over. Right? I see that as an example of the system in place. They have the capacity in terms of all the lawyers, etc., and the retired judges and whoever. They utilize the technology to make it as very, very transparent. And it really does, because I've been also saying openly in public space that, one of the things that will happen here is thought the OPR's website was full. So because we really are lagging behind in a lot of technology. When we get started with the financial matters, that I can't do everything online. A new entity, well staffed, well versed in what they do, have IT professionals able to carry out these processes in a very transparent way, and everybody could argue or say whatever they want, and everybody could have an opinion when all of that is done. But I think you're very well aware of how the legislation goes. But if either party is still aggrieved, they could go to open court. Right? So this here process, it works. So I do not know all the details of the TOR or the actual process that took place, but all of those things need to be argued by the people who are making the complaint. I hope you understand that even an entity like the GCC, we are all volunteers.
I wasn't really talking specifically about that particular issue. I was just using that as a launching pad, because I was actually inviting you to share with the public the extent to which so much improvement has been made. When you look at Section 13 of the procurement legislation, and when you look at the power to investigate, the power to establish a comprehensive database of information on public procurement, on tenders received, the award and value of the contract, setting and training standards, reviewing guidelines, preparing handbooks, promoting the use of technology, auditing and reviewing the systems of procurement and disposal to ensure compliance with the Act, investigate on its own initiative or upon complaint from any party involved in procurement or disposal of public property, any alleged breach of the Act. I mean, these are significant provisions. So I was really inviting you not to use, that was just a launching pad. But what I was hoping now to see that your work has not gone in vain at all, because when you see how strong and how the function and the powers, and then we talk about Section 14 with the powers to monitor a procurement, ensure compliance, conduct audit and periodic inspection to ensure compliance, issue directives to public bodies to ensure compliance, to carry out such acts, and that is very broad, and activities considered necessary or expedient for the carrying out of these functions. I mean, when you look at that, and then the power of investigation and enforcement in Part 4, and then the challenge procedures where the many provisions under that Part 4 talks about what the OPR can or cannot do and what persons shall or shall not do. And it allows them at the end of the day in Section 45 that if they reasonably suspect after doing all the investigation that the offense has been committed, to report it to the DPP for him to do what is necessary. And then the party has the power under the next section to challenge those proceedings. So I was really inviting you not to, if I gave the impression, I'm sorry, I apologize. I was really using that as a they use that when in teaching, you use an example But really, the example was to show how far we have come and the extent to which all that work that the JCC has been one of the main, you said, as you said, you'll have skin in the game, you've been open about that. But the extent to which the JCC has played an important role in having this legislation passed. And, I was just really inviting you to go through with us some of the important parts of the legislation, which really, with the passage of time, will do exactly what you are saying it will achieve. Mr. Khan?
Yeah, well, look, thanks for that. I do not profess to be an expert on the legislation. I am an engineer, right? I do read the various aspects of the act a lot, but especially as it relates to where the bee is in our bonnet now, which is we need to see the reports, we need to
Right.
see the aspects of the data collection being just that, collected and verified, and so that we now have data that we believe is transparently reviewed, so that the entire public, including us, can look at it and make comments. And I the act itself is pretty first world sort of stuff, and I think we're certainly going to benefit once we have more participation at all levels, and we some people will only when we see that they are being actually charged for offenses. So that, and I'm confident that with time there should be a change in behavior of public officials around public money, and which will only redound to the benefit of the country. We are facing lean times, and if we can save $500 million, then in after a year or two, then we will be doing well to get ourselves on that. There is no country in the world that doesn't suffer from drainage of finance. It is a constant fight to keep because of the nature of man. It cannot be done without laws that have a punitive connection to it, to ensure that we end up changing the behavior of people around public money. Now,
Somebody just asked if I will just have to interrupt because we have a few minutes left, but I want to give you the chance to answer it. I thought we had really addressed it, but maybe we did not. So it's good that the person has asked. They said they don't know how it benefits the man in the street. How does the procurement legislation benefit the man in the street? If you could give that, probably that is your because we have a few minutes left, but perhaps for people to be able to relate it and see what it means to them, because it's not a problem in Trinidad alone. It's a problem, but I'll let you give the explanation.
No, well, it definitely does end up touching the man in the street. If not directly, but indirectly, in most cases, because if we have a budget of $60 billion, we may be expending more than that, and we can save $1 billion. Now, the regulator has said that there's a potential to save up to $5 billion per annum. It's not going to happen in a year, in 2 years. We have gone on record as saying that we should see some reaping 5 years, but it's going to take time. But certainly that redounds to almost every service. Now we have any savings that could go do something, providing some other good or service to the community and to the people. Plus, there is another thing, which is that we a lot of criminality and so forth that is that we are faced with now, if we can attack that mode of thinking, of take and give me and not do things properly at any level, it's all going to be more power to the country and its citizens in the future.
For sure. And you know where you see that? I mean, I don't know if it's so or it's not so, but they always talk about how the community leader, how you have to pay them extortion money, how you have to give them contracts. I think this Mr. Nice, just a nice guy, it is going to help with the issue of corruption, which all of us feel on a daily basis. We feel a sense of corruption. That is what the legislation does. It's going to save money and it can be used for education, for other purposes. It will set the right tone for the country and perhaps deal with a lot of the criminality associated with extortion and gangs that require from the politicians themselves on both sides of the equation to be paid money in order to get their votes. So this legislation is but something good. It may not come home to you in your own house today, but at the end of the day, the country as a whole is going to benefit, and we're all going to benefit, as Mr. Khan has said. And I can't think of having a better guest on, Mr. Khan, than you, Mr. Nice Guy. Are you still confused that it's in layman terms? Because if it is that contracts are awarded and the suggestion is that money passing, we're not saying that is the case, but when they talk about corruption in public funding and public contracts, that is what they're talking about. They're talking about, we are not talking about Trinidad, we're talking about in a general sense, that when you are paying the minister or whoever it is, and down the line and down the line and down the line, envelope after envelope after envelope after envelope, and you're paying much more for contract than you should, it's not only stealing from you, it's not only a level of honesty, but it is depriving you of something that can be used to benefit you and your country and so on. So it may not come home to you directly, but it does benefit us in the end. And it's certainly an improvement from the Central Tenders Board Act. And I think what Mr. Khan has said this afternoon is really a fair comment. He is not putting, he's not glossing it over. He's saying it's not going to happen overnight, but there are lots of checks and balances. And maybe, it's legalese, a lot of legalese, but there are a lot of provisions in the Act that really give the regulator a lot of power. And you know what's a good thing about it, if I could just add and let Mr. Khan have the very last word, is while the report comes at the end, at the end of the year, which is what we haven't seen, during the year, the auditor, the regulator has power to monitor. The regulator has power to investigate. The regulator has power. She doesn't have to wait until the end to say, well, they did something bad and this is the price. All along, she can stop a contract. That is the power that the regulator can exercise to ensure that you get value for money and there's transparency. And Mr. Khan, 3 more minutes and I'm leaving it to you. Mr. Khan, have you disappeared? Is Mr. Khan there with us?
Yes.
Yes, I'm just saying if you could just wind up. Just to wind up, I just tried to say it in my own words, but I think you
are you hearing me?
Yes, I just to wind up and answer. Just a nice guy who might be talking for people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. Look, it is like what you just said is important for me to reinforce it with this, right? We have the EM Act, the Environmental Management Act, and we have a lot of lawlessness all over Trinidad with noise and so forth. The way it works best is when you have complaints. So the same thing with this act. We need to have everyone needs to be on the lookout and understand what that they could make valid complaints, and it will be an incrementally improved regime as we go forward, but it's not going to change Trinidad in today for tomorrow. But we need to stick with it, and we have something to work with. So thanks a lot for having me on, Ms.
And will benefit all of us in Trinidad and Tobago. all of us will benefit. And thank you for coming on. Mr. Khan, David, you've been very quiet. I don't know why. You've been extremely quiet.
Well, Mr. Khan has been so explicit. I had to absorb most of what he said.
Good. So I hope we answered your question as best as we could. And thank you so much for joining us. And I think we all benefited from the discussion. So see you next week for another conversation on Hard Talk, where we will have a special guest with us joining us. As usual, good evening to everyone. And a special thanks to Mr. Khan for making time to join us on Hard Talk on Power 102 FM Digital.
Okay, thank you so very much, Karen. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Very, very informative. Join us next Monday when Karen will be back to host another edition of Hard Talk right here at Power 102 Digital.